The Kremlin regime is trying to convince Russians that they are at war with all of NATO in order to maintain the myth of a victorious army, said Russian political scientist Dmitry Oreshkin. We've lost 1 million men, thousands of tanks, hundreds of aircraft, the Black Sea Fleet, which is afraid to leave Novorossiysk and has already left Sevastopol. And what about NATO's losses? Well, NATO hasn't arrived yet. Where are the regular NATO units? Where are the NATO planes with their NATO pilots? None of that is there. Putin is at war with Ukraine and he can't defeat it, he said. According to Oreshkin, if you critically evaluate everything Putin says, it becomes obvious that this man is simply insane. Putin's regime wasn't always what it is today, and it was built slowly over time, with rights and opportunities gradually being stripped away here and there and gradually expanded, the political scientist said. He also noted that the sanctions have seriously shaken Russia. The expert does not exclude that the sanctions and the war in Ukraine will cause Russians to rebel against Putin, as living conditions in the country are becoming increasingly difficult. 3.5 years after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, with fighting at a stalemate and the US-led peace process stalled, Kiev's allies are once again talking about renewing economic pressure on Moscow. The goal is to make the war so expensive that the Kremlin is forced to change course, CNN reports. Despite 18 EU sanctions packages and dozens of measures from the US, UK and other countries, the Russian economy remains vibrant. However, cracks are becoming increasingly visible. Growth is slowing to 1%. Inflation is reaching 7% and the key rate remains at a painful 17%. The Kremlin's oil and gas revenues are declining and the budget deficit is growing. Yet, Russia plans to maintain military spending at 4 times its pre-war level by raising VAT from 20% to 22%. This decision shows that the Kremlin is preparing for a long-term conflict, explains Alexandra Prokopenko of the Carnegie Center. Experts are convinced that the time has come not just for more sanctions, but for more reasonable ones. Timothy Ash of Chatham House proposes introducing a 20 to 30% secondary tariff on Russian exports, with the proceeds being used to support Ukraine. The EU, for its part, is considering a €140 billion loan for Kiev, financed by frozen Russian assets. This would send a powerful signal to Moscow that Ukraine is funded and prepared to fight for a long time, says Ash. Another analyst, Alexander Kolyander of the Center for European Policy Analysis, proposes another approach, encouraging the emigration of skilled workers from Russia. This, he believes, will deepen the labor crisis and create additional pressure on the Russian economy.
The sight of thousands of Guard troops with bayonet rifles and tanks on Memphis streets in 1968 is still fresh for Joe Calhoun. According to Associated Press, Calhoun marched with sanitation workers led by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. when violence, destruction, and a fatal shooting by police spurred a deployment to the city streets. King was drawn to Memphis in 1968 to support some 1,300 predominantly black sanitation workers who went on strike to protest inhumane treatment. King arrived to lead a march in late March, which turned violent when police and protesters clashed on the iconic Beale Street, and an officer fatally shot a 16-year-old. The National Guard was quickly ordered into the city. Trump announced last month that the National Guard would be deployed to combat crime in Memphis alongside authorities from a slew of federal agencies. Republican Governor Bill Lee, who is supportive of the effort, said the National Guard will be deputized by the U.S.
1968, I was 18, 17, 18. I was part of the sanitation strike as a youth. I actually lived in Claiborne Temple for a month instead of, we had a curfew during part of that time. So instead of trying to go back and forth and catch a bus, I just stayed at Claiborne Temple. It was much more convenient. So I got to make the "I am a man" signs in the basement, and then was a marshal for the a marshal for the marches in the daytime. We have several photos behind me of the National Guard. It's a very imposing sight to have tanks on your street. They're right behind me, and then to have them line up down Beale Street with rifles. They were weaponized at that time, so they had rifles with bayonets on them. So that's a very imposing sight for young kids to see that on their way to school, to see it on the way to church or whatever. So we do not want to see that at all. At 75, I got 4 grandchildren. So much of what I do is to help make a better world for them so that they don't have to go through the same thing. But it's taken a lot longer than I thought it would. Their presence, regardless of whether it's 50 or 200, regardless of whether it's 50 or 200, it's the same. It's threatening to a community, and it's overreach. The problem is still, it's a show. It's a show that says, we saved Memphis. Memphis saved Memphis.